So my name's Carolyn Curtis and I'm the Chief Executive at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. I loved Stefan's slide on just the key facts. I thought that is brilliant. So I don't have that slide, but I'll just give you the hardcore facts about TACSI. So we are a not-for-profit organisation. There are around 30 of us, between 30 and 40. We expand and contract depending on what we have on our plate at the time. We have an annual turnover of around 6.5 million Australian dollars. I'll let you you do the maths. And we employ our remarkable staff from all over the world. So we have staff that come from India, from New York, from the UK, from Spain, everywhere. And we have an incredibly diverse team, all united behind the desire to really help people live their best life. So at the centre, we really exist to build next generation social policy and support systems that enable people to live their best life. That's what gets us up in the morning, and that is our passion. But the thing I wanted to mention today is there's almost this parallel brief. It's one that's more unspoken, but it's one that we've held very near and dear at TACSI. And I think I would quite honestly say to you, we are our own longest standing project. And we've been really thinking very hard about how do you run a social innovation organisation? How do you organise? How do you work together? How do you bring the most diverse minds and skill sets together to really generate outcomes and impact? How do you make decisions? What are the right operational structures that enable you to learn and evolve and iterate? So whilst trying to actually make a difference for the people that we're there to serve, we've also had to really look inwards and say to ourselves, well, actually, it needs to start with us. And what is the next generation organisation that really enables us to continue to learn, iterate and evolve and constantly respond to changing markets and contexts? So we have gone through quite an evolution over the last 12 months actually, in that we almost have three businesses at TACSI, but they are absolutely overlapping and mutually reinforcing. For me, this was a really massive milestone because I didn't know if this was possible for us in Australia. Yes, we wear our 27 years of consecutive growth like a badge in Australia, but many of us are not feeling too proud of that fact at the moment. Wealth concentration and inequality is growing. Our policy is becoming more punitive and top-down. We change prime ministers like we change underwear, as you would know. And so times are interesting in Australia. But for us, we have three very different types of work with different business models and different conditions and capabilities required. So the first one in the blue circle is really around our innovation consulting and capability building. So this part of our business operates in a fee-for-service capacity. It is still very, very impact and outcomes focused. We say no to a lot of work. We still change the brief 10 times with a potential client or customer before we actually progress. But this is the part of the business that enables us to be and keep the doors open. And we have had to have a really commercial mindset at TACSI to be able to operate and grow our impact. The second part of the business, which is new, and that's our sort of future systems accelerator. And for us, this is more the blue sky thinking. This is us actually trying to imagine and test and explore what different futures could look like. So here, rather than running singular prototypes around a new service or a new policy, it's normally that we've got multiple prototypes happening simultaneously to really imagine what a new place or a new system might look like. So an example here is at the moment we're holding a very big question around how do we actually reimagine the way people live as they age, and what are different ways of living as you age. And the third sort of business and way of working for us is around scaling what works. So we have built, and we've had some amazing partners and communities that we've worked with to generate new supports and new sorts of services and solutions that really work for people. And we believe if you replicate those services that you can really create a much greater impact. So we've created services for families and people interacting with the child protection system, for carers and people caring for a loved one, for people who are foster carers and looking after children who aren't their own, and for young people trying to gain employment. And we're on a pathway of trying to really understand, well, how do you scale something that works? And what is a lot of that invisible sort of fodder you need to design and create for that to work at scale? So quality assurance mechanisms, you know, we're working with procurement, with contractors. You know, at the moment we're looking at what is the role of families in actually deciding who runs the services that they're wanting to utilise. So all sorts of interesting things there. So like I said, overlapping, mutually reinforcing, but a big thing for us was really about how do we set those conditions to be able to do different types of work within the organisation. And across all of those types of work, they're really funneling down some big questions we're holding. And this is us really trying to name change we want to make. I think with social labs or social innovation organisations, we're really at risk of doing a whole lot but actually achieving very little. And I never wanted to do that at TACSI. So around 70% of our work is now funneling through four very big and ambitious questions that we certainly can't answer alone. So the first one is around how do we disrupt intergenerational cycles of disadvantage and accelerate cycles of advantage? The second one is around the one I said before, but how do we actually redesign the way people live as they age? The third is around how do we bring the people back into healthcare? And the last one, quite specific to Australia, is how do we further self-determination through Indigenous-led innovation? So what we're doing is building portfolios of work around key leverage points within those big questions. So we can, over time, feel like we're making meaningful contributions with some spectacular partners towards actually making social progress. We have a very diverse team, very similar to what our friends have talked about. I'm a social worker, and we have other folk that are from design backgrounds, social science, policy, business, etc. And specifically for today, with the focus on public sector, again, this has been an evolution for us in that we've been really trying to understand, you know, how do you transfer skills? How do you make sure that you're not just going into public sector and, you know, taking a problem, handing over some sort of silver bullet solution and leaving? How do you make sure you're actually leaving and building new behaviours, new mindsets, new conditions, new ways of working? So for us, the key ways that we're currently working with governments across Australia and a little bit internationally is, first of all, we work with government to build the capability and conditions for social innovation. Secondly, and we're doing more and more of this, is we're actually building joint teams to tackle problems. So there's a foot in government, a foot out. So an example of that at the moment is we've built a joint team with the New South Wales government to really look at what happens when a child is diagnosed with special needs. Families are feeling incredibly lost and out of control, and there aren't systems and good processes in place to really set that child and family on a good trajectory. So through having a foot in, foot out, and building a joint team around this really significant systemic issue, we're working together to find some potential, first of all, prototypes and ultimately solutions to be implemented. And lastly, we've now worked with a few governments and also NGOs to support the creation and implementation of innovation teams, of which the skills and capability is part of, but as I mentioned before, there's all that boring stuff around admin, business processes, systems, but ways of working, ways of making decisions, ways of trusting. And this is something we're really interested in. So really quickly, just to give you a flavour of this all coming to life, in terms of thinking about sort of service and experience design, recently we worked with the New South Wales government and a really well-respected NGO in Australia called McKillop Family Services to create an alternative form of foster care. So in Australia, we have a profound issue around child abuse and neglect. 1 in 4 children is reported for child abuse and neglect by the time they're in their teens. And at the moment, we remove many of those children and we never give them back. And that is just not okay. So what we realised is that there are some remarkable assets that are just not being utilised within communities and within society. So we found, making a very long story short, these remarkable foster carers that had actually built their own workarounds. And effectively, we've created a new type of foster care that actually works with the whole family, not just with the child, to really work towards that child going home again. In the policy and commissioning space, we recently formed a joint team with Australia's federal government. And what we were trying to really understand is how do we actually improve employment outcomes for our Indigenous Australians. So we worked across the country. We spent time in people's houses, in caravan parks, on their couches, to really understand what is getting in the way of people finding meaningful engagement in our economy. And we met people like Mick and Shannon and Doug and Leanne, Diane and Jared, who actually provided us with just the most remarkable insights. And now, and I'm sure you will understand, is we're in a real tussle with government because those insights are pushing into a direction that perhaps challenges the current system on a level they weren't quite anticipating. So the desire is to try and make that work go away and bury it deep in a drawer, but we've now got a group of community members across Australia that are actually saying, no, we actually think there's a better alternative here. And in terms of innovation capability, I wanted to mention this one. We worked with the UNDP in Sri Lanka with a new social innovation lab here, and we got to do some things with these guys which was a real first for us, right from the beginning around recruiting that team. And how do you recruit a great innovation team? We got to do some work with them around administration systems and operations, and then some real hands-on in the work, sort of skill building and capability building. And also lastly, I think some of our greatest learning has come most recently from this piece, working in some of the regional areas in New South Wales. And what we've been trying to understand here is how do you build and embed capability for social innovation in local communities. There's quite a place-based movement in Australia at the moment. You might have heard of the term collective impact, and there's other sort of approaches. But what we were seeing was that these communities were becoming really reliant on what Australians call FIFOs, which means fly in, fly out consultants. And we love to shorten everything in Australia. We weren't actually building into and stitching into the communities. And so we ran a series of experiments to try and understand how do you build, translate and embed the capabilities into communities. Now the answer's not straightforward, but in a nutshell, where we've landed is at the moment in Australia, and I think in a lot of places, we're investing a lot of money in sort of 101 skill building. So come to a workshop on human-centred design, come to a workshop on prototyping. And we had foundations literally paying millions of dollars to sort of set up these fancy conferences and 101s. And then what was happening was people were going back to their desks, and then that was it. They were going back to their desks. And so what we realised is this quite profound gap around translation. And so we've built a platform that we're currently prototyping in 4 regional communities, which is not just focused around the skill building, but it's focused around the mindsets, the skill sets and the processes, but it's very much focused on how those things progress into practice and then into outcomes. And the translation piece from knowledge into practice has been really pivotal in starting to get some real traction and activity happening in these communities that's owned and led by the communities. And I will stop there because I am so over time, but thanks for Louise. Thank you, everybody.